The desert night was supposed to be calm. A routine convoy, nothing more. 24 vehicles rolled across the barren landscape under a moon that glowed like a pale coin, casting silver light across the sand. Engines rumbled in rhythm, headlights piercing the dark. The soldiers inside the transports were tired but steady, another supply run to reinforce the forward operating base. Nothing unusual, nothing to fear. Until the first explosion. It came without warning. A thunderclap tore through the night as the lead truck vanished in a column of fire. Shards of steel rained across the convoy, shredding tires and piercing armored doors. The blast wave slammed men to the floor, ears ringing, lungs gasping for air. Shouts echoed through radios, commands tangled with screams. Within seconds, the routine run had become a battlefield. Enemy fire poured down from the ridges. RPGs streaked like fiery comets, crashing into Humvees and sending them flipping into the sand. Tracer rounds sliced the darkness, stitching fiery arcs across the valley. The convoy, strung out across open ground, had nowhere to run. They were boxed in, a kill zone prepared long before the soldiers arrived. Lieutenant commanding the convoy barked into the radio. Defensive positions, return fire. But his words were nearly drowned by the roar of machine guns. Men scrambled from smoking vehicles, diving into ditches, firing blindly toward muzzle flashes in the hills. The enemy was disciplined, relentless, and heavily armed. For every burst of return fire, 3 more attacks rained down. The ground shook again as another truck erupted, throwing men into the air like rag dolls. The stench of burning diesel mixed with blood and dust, choking every breath. Overhead, the sky glowed orange, lit by flames licking into the heavens. Soldiers coughed, screamed, and shouted for medics, their voices carried away by the wind. "Where's air support?" one private yelled, crouched behind the smoking wreck of a Humvee. His sergeant only shook his head, squeezing off rounds into the darkness. They had called it in the moment the ambush began, but the response was always the same: stand by. Somewhere out there, jets sat on runways, waiting for clearance that would never come in time. By midnight, the convoy was crippled. Of the 24 vehicles, more than half were destroyed or disabled. Ammunition ran dangerously low. Medics worked frantically under fire, patching torn flesh with shaking hands, dragging the wounded behind burning wrecks for cover. Still, the attacks didn't stop. Mortar shells whistled overhead, slamming into the earth with bone-shaking force. The soldiers were surrounded, cut off, and hopelessly outnumbered. Clenched the radio in his fist, desperation in his voice. "We're not going to hold, command. We need birds in the air now or we're done." Static answered him, followed by the same empty promise: "We're working on it." The truth settled like ash. Reinforcements weren't coming, not in time. 200 men huddled in a valley of fire, waiting for the inevitable. Some whispered prayers, others cursed. The young ones, barely 20, shook as they reloaded, fingers slippery with sweat and blood. Veterans fought in silence, jaws clenched, eyes burning with fury. But inside, even they knew what it meant to be caught in a perfect kill box. One soldier, face streaked with grime, whispered to his buddy, "We're not getting out of here, are we?" His buddy didn't answer. He just fired another burst, teeth gritted, knowing that silence said everything. Then through the haze of smoke and fire, a distant sound cut across the chaos. A low thump-thump-thump, faint at first, then growing louder. Soldiers looked up, disbelief in their eyes. It wasn't artillery. It wasn't mortars. It was rotors. Helicopter rotors slicing through the night air with mechanical fury. The men froze, listening. Hearts hammered, hope flickering like the first spark of dawn. Above the ridge, silhouetted against the burning horizon, a black hawk appeared, its blades tearing the sky, flying lower and faster than any sane pilot would dare. At the controls was a captain who had no intention of leaving anyone behind. Captain Carter sat in the dimly lit ready room, helmet resting on her lap, listening to the chaos unravel through the radio. The transmissions were a blur of desperation, gunfire cracking in the background, commanders shouting coordinates, soldiers screaming for medics. She leaned forward, jaw tight, as another message came through. Convoy Alpha is taking heavy casualties, 200 trapped. Request immediate extraction. The response from command was clipped, almost mechanical. Negative, air corridor unsafe. Hold position until support is cleared. Slammed her fist against the table. Hold position. Those men were surrounded, dying by the minute. They'll all be gone before clearance comes, she muttered, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. Her co-pilot, Warrant Officer Daniel Price, gave her a cautious look. He'd flown with her before, long enough to know that her silence was never truly silent. Inside her head, gears were turning fast and reckless. "Don't say it," he warned. She lifted her eyes, burning with resolve. "We're going in." Price swore under his breath. "You know what that means, Carter. No green light, no backup. We're flying blind into a shooting gallery." Stood, snapping her helmet on with finality. Those men don't care about rules of engagement. They care about staying alive until sunrise. If we don't move, they won't have a sunrise. Her crew chief, Staff Sergeant, overheard from the corner. He smirked, shaking his head. "Figures. Only you would drag us into hell for 200 strangers." He grabbed his gear anyway, like a man resigned to fate but unwilling to abandon his captain. The Black Hawk roared to life minutes later, blades chopping the night, sending sand swirling across the tarmac. Gripped the controls like they were part of her own body, eyes narrowing as the bird lifted into the air. She didn't wait for final clearance. She didn't wait for anyone. Over the comms, Command's voice cracked in. "Black Hawk 2-1, you are not authorized for launch. Return immediately." Clicked the mic, her voice steady. Too late. Already airborne. She cut the transmission before they could argue further. The valley stretched before her like a throat ready to swallow them whole. Smoke plumes rose on the horizon, glowing against the moonlight. The crackle of distant gunfire echoed even above the helicopter's thumping blades. Every instinct screamed at her that this was suicide, but she had never been one to back down from fire. Price scanned the instruments. "We're picking up radar locks. They've got anti-air down there. You're asking us to dance through a minefield." Gave a sharp grin, the kind that carried more defiance than comfort. "Then let's dance." The Black Hawk nosed forward, slicing through the night at reckless speed. Dropped altitude, hugging the terrain, weaving between ridges and valleys. The desert blurred beneath them, and her crew felt every sharp turn like a punch in the gut. Dust and grit blasted the windows, visibility shrinking, but hands never trembled. "Jesus, Carter," Price muttered, clinging to his harness. "You're gonna get us killed." "Not tonight," she replied, voice flat, eyes locked ahead. For a brief moment, the radio filled with terrified voices from the ground. Soldiers calling coordinates, medics screaming for evacuation, a young private's broken sobs. The sound lit a fire inside her chest. Every mile she flew closer, she could picture their faces, not just nameless voices, but brothers in arms waiting for a miracle. As the first bursts of tracer fire stitched across the sky, Price flinched. Cursed. Only leaned harder into the controls, ducking under the storm like a predator diving through waves. The Black Hawk roared toward the kill zone, defying every calculation of survival. The convoy below was burning, soldiers crouched in desperation, eyes skyward. They didn't expect rescue. They expected death. But through the flames, the low growl of rotors thundered closer, until the unmistakable silhouette of a Black Hawk burst into view, racing toward the kill zone with reckless courage. And at its helm, Captain Carter bore down on hell itself, with no intention of turning back. The valley erupted the instant Black Hawk crested the ridge. Muzzle flashes blinked from every slope like a swarm of fireflies turned murderous. Tracer rounds carved glowing paths through the night sky, converging toward the helicopter in deadly streams. "Contact! Contact left and right!" bellowed over the roar of the rotors, gripping the mounted M240 like it was an extension of his soul. He opened fire, sweeping arcs of suppression across the The weapon's thunder shook the airframe, brass casings raining onto the cabin floor. Yanked the cyclic, throwing the Black Hawk into a violent dive. Bullets cracked across the fuselage, sparking like fireworks. The bird shook, groaning as armor plates absorbed the punishment. Price's voice climbed in panic. "They've got heavy machine guns locked on us." "Then stay low," barked, forcing the helicopter to skim so close to the desert floor that the skids nearly scraped rock. A wall of tracer fire hissed just feet above their rotors. Dust clouds rose in their wake, blinding anyone unlucky enough to chase them. The ambushers hadn't expected anyone to fly straight into their jaws. They unleashed everything at once, RPGs streaking like flaming javelins, mortars thundering from hidden pits. One rocket whooshed past the cockpit, exploding against the cliff in a fireball that rattled teeth. Another spiraled toward them head-on. With a snap decision, she rolled the Black Hawk sideways, tucking one rotor dangerously close to the ground. The rocket screamed past, detonating harmlessly in the empty air. Price let out a choked laugh. "You're insane." Didn't look away from the chaos ahead. Insane keeps us alive. Below, soldiers trapped in the convoy looked up in disbelief. Through the smoke and fire, they saw the impossible. A single helicopter weaving through storms of gunfire, daring the valley to bring it down. Men who moments ago had resigned themselves to death shouted in renewed fury, emptying magazines at the, emboldened by the sight of reinforcements. Yelled over the headset, "We've got RPG teams on the ridge at 3 o'clock. He swung his weapon, unleashing a torrent of rounds. Enemy fighters scattered, two crumpling under the barrage, but more poured in behind them. The valley was crawling with hostiles, and every hill seemed to sprout a new threat. The cockpit smelled of cordite and hot metal. Warning lights blinked angrily across the dash, fuel line stress, hydraulic strain, minor hits peppering the fuselage. Ignored them all. She flew like the helicopter was an extension of her own pulse, banking, rolling, twisting through death itself. Her eyes locked on the kill zone ahead. Wrecked vehicles burned like funeral pyres, soldiers crouched behind them, muzzle flashes stuttering as they clung to survival. Through her headset, she heard the broken voice of a ground sergeant. "Whoever you are up there, God bless you. Just don't leave us." Tightened her grip. "Copy that, we're coming in." The descent was madness. She nosed the bird straight into the teeth of the ambush. RPG trails slashed past in glowing streaks, mortars burst in geysers of sand. Each second felt stretched thin, balanced on the edge of annihilation. Price called out airspeed, altitude, incoming vectors, his voice cracking under the pressure. Filtered it all, cold and sharp, her hands moving faster than thought. Gun thundered nonstop, the barrel glowing red, the cabin filling with the acrid bite of gunpowder. His shouts became primal, less words, more raw fury. Every trigger squeeze bought another heartbeat for the soldiers below. At 50 feet, the helicopter was enveloped in smoke, flames licking across its shadow. Bullets pinged against armor, shattering windows, tearing through panels. Held the controls steady, teeth gritted, as if sheer will alone could keep the bird from tearing apart. And then, impossibly, they broke through. The Black Hawk slammed down into the center of the kill zone, skids grinding against scorched earth. Soldiers sprinted toward it, faces lit with shock and relief. For the first time that night, the men saw more than fire and death. They saw hope descending from the sky. Inside the cockpit, knuckles were white around the controls. Her breathing was ragged, sweat dripping down her face. But her voice, when it cut through the headset, was steady as iron. "Welcome to the ride, boys. Let's bring them home." Black Hawk hit the ground like thunder, skids screeching against dirt and broken metal. Dust billowed upward, mixing with smoke from burning vehicles. Soldiers who'd been crouched in despair only moments before now sprinted toward the helicopter, shouting, waving, dragging the wounded behind them. For them, the sight of that bird wasn't just machinery. It was life clawing its way into hell. Held the controls steady, every nerve taut. The fuselage rattled with the impacts of incoming fire. Tracers sliced through the air around the cockpit. She kept her eyes forward, jaw locked. "Cover the approach. Price, keep an eye on the gauges. I want to know if we're about to fall apart." "Already halfway there, Captain," Price barked, sweat dripping down his temple as warning lights glowed red across the console. Hydraulic pressure fluctuated wildly, fuel levels bled out faster than they should, but ignored the numbers. Survival wasn't math, it was will. Leaned out of the cabin, M240 roaring. The barrel blazed like a forge, spit flying from his clenched teeth as he swept the ridge with withering fire. "Move, move, move," he screamed at the soldiers below, his voice carrying above the chaos. On the ground, medics worked with frantic hands. They hauled men with shattered legs and burned flesh, dragging them across scorched dirt. One corporal, blood streaming down his arm, refused to board until he had lifted his unconscious buddy onto the deck. "Take him first," he roared, shoving the stretcher aboard before collapsing from exhaustion. Inside the cabin, the space filled fast, bodies stacked shoulder to shoulder, some groaning, others silent. The smell of sweat, gunpowder, and blood thickened the air. A medic knelt over a private with half his uniform shredded, pumping his chest rhythmically. Another soldier screamed as a tourniquet was cinched tight on what remained of his leg. The floor became slick with crimson. Outside, the kill zone was alive with fire. Enemy fighters closed in, emboldened by the sight of their prey gathering in one place. RPGs arced toward the helicopter like hunting spears. One struck so close that the blast rocked the Black Hawk sideways. Dirt rained through the open cabin doors, pelting the wounded. Fought the controls, yanking the bird upright by sheer force of will. "Captain, we can't sit here," Price shouted, voice cracking under the strain. "Another hit like that and we're scrap." His voice was calm, cold as steel. "Not until we're full." Her eyes flicked to the mirrors. More soldiers ran from the shadows, dragging wounded, limping, coughing through the smoke. Some fired their rifles one-handed as they staggered towards salvation. She wasn't leaving them, not one. Cursed, firing nonstop, the gun's belt clinking to the floor. "We're running out of ammo," he yelled. "Make it count," snapped back. The last group stumbled into view, 5 men hauling a comrade who was barely conscious. They pushed themselves beyond exhaustion, legs giving out as they crossed open ground. Bullets sparked at their feet. One man fell, hit in the shoulder. The others dragged him up, teeth bared, refusing to quit. His heart hammered as she watched them stumble closer. Every instinct screamed to lift off now, to get clear before the bird was torn apart. But she held steady, rotors screaming overhead, engines straining like dying beasts. At last, the final soldiers collapsed into the cabin, bodies piling into the already cramped hold. Yanked one man aboard with a grunt, slamming the cabin door with his boot. "We're packed, let's go." Didn't hesitate. She pulled hard on the collective. The Black Hawk heaved upward, straining under the load. Bullets clawed at its belly as it lifted, tracers crisscrossing the sky like fiery spiderwebs. For a split second, the helicopter hovered in the kill zone, silhouetted against fire and chaos. Then it surged upward, clawing its way back into the night, carrying the broken and the living out of the valley of death. In the cabin, a soldier wept, not from pain, but from the shock of being alive. And at the controls, Captain Carter stared into the darkness, already preparing to turn back. The Black Hawk clawed skyward, engines shrieking under the weight of too many men crammed into its battered frame. Warning lights blinked across the console, hydraulics failing, engines overheating, fuel bleeding faster than predicted. Still, kept her hands locked to the controls, eyes narrowed. She could feel the helicopter groaning beneath her like a wounded beast. "Jesus, Carter, she's not gonna hold together," Price shouted, scanning the dials. "We're already one bird short of a fireball." Didn't answer. Below, the convoy still burned, shadows of soldiers waving, waiting, survivors, men she hadn't lifted yet. She couldn't leave them, not now, not ever. "Get these guys clear," she barked, nodding toward the wounded crammed behind them. "Keep them steady. Price, plot me a fast route in and out. Price spun in disbelief. You're not serious, you want to go back. Glare cut through him like steel. There are still men down there. Until the last one's out, we're not finished. The Black Hawk limped back toward the base, engines coughing. Medics hauled wounded onto stretchers, blood dripping onto the dirt. As soon as the last stretcher hit the ground, shoved the throttle forward again. Against all logic, she lifted the helicopter back into the night. Slammed a fist against the cabin wall. Captain, this bird can't take another run. Look at her. She's bleeding fuel, she's shaking herself to pieces. And you? He pointed at her arm. Blood soaked through sleeve, dripping down her fingers where shrapnel had torn into her flesh. She had tied a tourniquet high above the wound, but the fabric was already dark with crimson. His voice was steady, though every word carried pain. I'll fly with one arm if I have to. Price stared at her, horror and admiration warring on his face. You're going to kill us all. Not if we get to them first, she shot back, eyes locked on the horizon. The valley reappeared in the distance, glowing with fire and fury. Enemy gunners hadn't let up. They were waiting. Tracer fire stitched the sky as soon as the helicopter broke over the ridge. Mortars lit the desert in rolling bursts of thunder. The ambushers had learned her rhythm, anticipating her approach. Didn't falter. She dropped altitude again, skimming so low that the rotors cut through the tops of brush. Bullets chewed the dirt behind them like a swarm of angry wasps. She banked hard left, throwing the bird sideways, slamming Price against his harness. The soldiers still trapped in the kill zone erupted in cheers when they saw the Black Hawk return. Their hope, once ashes, roared back to life. They surged toward her landing zone even as the enemy tried to choke it off. Slammed the bird down again, skids biting deep into charred earth. The cabin doors flew open, laid down furious streams of fire, covering the desperate rush of men dragging the last of their wounded. RPGs screeched overhead, one detonating so close it sprayed the cockpit with shrapnel. A shard pierced through the windshield, slicing across forearm. Her hand spasmed, but she forced her grip tight, teeth grinding against the pain. Price shouted, "You're hit again." Didn't blink, so as everyone else, keep them moving. One by one, soldiers stumbled into the cabin. Some collapsed immediately, others clawed to their feet, hauling their brothers in with them. Dragged a sergeant inside, the man's leg mangled beyond recognition. The cabin filled again, crammed shoulder to shoulder, a mosaic of blood, dirt, and sheer defiance. The helicopter lurched under the weight. Warning klaxons screamed inside the cockpit, hydraulics whining. Vision blurred, her arm throbbed, but she refused to let go. Every instinct screamed she was pushing too far, that the bird would tear itself apart. "Come on, girl," she whispered to the helicopter, voice trembling. "One more run." She yanked on the collective, and with a roar of protest, the Black Hawk lifted off the ground once more. The valley spat fire at her, refusing to let her escape. But Carter was past fear, past reason. She was the breaking point, body bleeding, machine dying, yet spirit unbroken. And still she kept flying. The night was far from over. The valley burned behind her, but knew it wasn't empty. There were still men down there, men who hadn't made it onto her previous lifts. She could hear them over the radio, voices strained and broken, begging for a miracle. Each call felt like a knife to her chest. She couldn't leave them, not now, not ever. The Black Hawk groaned with every mile, metal creaking as though it might split apart midair. Warning lights glared across the cockpit, fuel critically low, hydraulics screaming. Price shook his head, voice hoarse. "She's done. If we go back, we're not coming out again." His hand, bandaged but trembling, pushed the throttle forward. Her other arm bled freely, pain buzzing like fire through her veins. Still, her eyes stayed fixed on the inferno ahead. If they're still alive, then so are we. We're going back. Let out a curse, but he slammed a fresh belt into his weapon. His hands shook from exhaustion, but there was a glint in his eyes, a mix of disbelief and loyalty. "If we're dying tonight," he muttered, "I'll die shooting." The valley rose into view once more, and stomach clenched. What had been chaos before was now devastation. The convoy was nothing but twisted steel and flame. Craters marked the earth like scars, and the smoke was thick enough to blot out the stars. Yet through that hellscape she saw movement, shadows limping, crawling, dragging each other toward the faint hope of rescue. The Black Hawk roared low over the wreckage, drawing immediate fire. The enemy had prepared for her return. Machine guns barked from every ridge, RPGs arced upward in murderous streaks. The air lit up with tracers, a deadly cage of light. "Brace!" shouted, pulling hard on the controls. The helicopter twisted violently, rotors barely clearing the ridge as a rocket streaked beneath them, detonating with a thunderous shockwave. The blast rocked the bird sideways. Price slammed against his harness. Curses filled the cabin. "Captain, she can't take much more," Price yelled, his voice raw. "She doesn't have to," growled. "Just one more run." She nosed the bird down hard, skimming into the kill zone. Soldiers on the ground erupted in shouts when they saw her descend again. They surged forward, stumbling, some firing one-handed as they carried the wounded. It was a race against death, and the finish line was the Black Hawk's open doors. Unleashed his fury from the cabin, the M240 spitting fire as fast as he could reload. Enemy fighters fell, others scattered, but more poured in. Bullets pinged off the fuselage, sparks dancing across the armor. A round shattered the side window near his head, glass cutting across her cheek. She didn't flinch. Get them in," she screamed. The first wave reached the helicopter. Men collapsed onto the floor, gasping, bleeding, eyes wide with disbelief that they made it. Others pushed behind them, dragging comrades too wounded to walk. A sergeant with a broken leg shoved 2 privates aboard before collapsing in the dirt, grabbed him by the vest and yanked him inside with brute force. The cabin filled to bursting. Soldiers sat on top of each other, bodies stacked, some screaming in pain, others eerily silent. The weight dragged the Black Hawk down, skids sinking deeper into the scorched earth. Another RPG shrieked past, so close it scorched the paint from the tail. The blast wave slammed the helicopter sideways. Alarms shrilled, red lights flashing across the console. Price shouted coordinates, desperate to keep ahead of incoming fire. "They've locked us from 3 sides. We're boxed in." His pulse thundered. She glanced once into the cabin, saw the faces of 24 men staring back, faces pale with fear but glowing with hope. She bared her teeth in a grim smile. "Then we'll break the box." Her hands, slick with blood, clamped the controls. With a roar, she hauled on the collective. The helicopter shuddered, engines howling as if in agony. For a heartbeat, it refused to rise, waited, broken, defiant. Then, inch by inch, the Black Hawk lifted. Skids scraped the ground, then cleared. Tracers clawed upward, raking the air, but the bird kept climbing. Soldiers inside shouted, cried, prayed. The rotors chopped through the smoke, tearing them free from the valley of fire. As the ground dropped away, exhaled for the first time in minutes. The last survivors were aboard. The convoy was gone, but 200 souls now lived, balanced precariously on a machine held together by hope and stubbornness. And the night was not done hunting them. The Black Hawk climbed unevenly, straining as though each foot of altitude was borrowed from fate itself. Warning klaxons screamed, lights flashed red, the cabin rattled with each violent shudder. Hands were slick with sweat and blood, muscles numb from exhaustion, but she held the controls in an iron grip. The men packed inside were silent now. Some prayed under their breath. Others sat with eyes shut, too broken to look at the battlefield shrinking below. A few watched, as if her sheer defiance alone kept the machine in the air. Then Price's voice cut through the headset, tight with panic. "We've got fast movers on scope, closing fast. Hostiles, they're hunting us." His jaw clenched. She had expected this. The enemy wouldn't just let her limp away with their prize. They'd throw everything they had into finishing her before she reached safety. "How long until intercept?" she demanded. Seconds, Price answered grimly. Maybe less. The first jet screamed into view, a dark silhouette slicing across the moonlit sky. It dove hard, spitting cannon fire that tore the night apart. Rounds shredded the air around them, chewing at the battered Black Hawk's tail, jerked the bird into a violent roll, the cabin exploding with shouts as soldiers slammed against each other. "Hold on," she roared, teeth clenched as she pulled a maneuver no helicopter had business attempting. The rotors groaned, skids kissed treetops, but somehow, impossibly, the bird stayed aloft. Cursed, shoving another belt into his weapon. "I can't shoot jets out of the sky, Captain." "Then keep their ground fire off us," snapped. But deep inside, she knew they were finished. A Black Hawk, half dead, overloaded with men, could never outfly jets. She whispered a silent apology to the soldiers she carried. At least they'd die fighting, not burning on the ground. And then thunder. It wasn't the thunder of mortars or artillery. It was sharper, cleaner, deeper. A sound that cracked across the heavens like the fist of God. Two streaks of silver tore through the night, faster than sound, faster than thought. F-22 Raptors. They came screaming down from high altitude, twin engines glowing like comets. The sky lit with the fire of their afterburners as they dove into the enemy jets. One missile streaked across canopy, slamming into a hostile fighter with a blinding explosion. The night shook with the shockwave as the enemy disintegrated midair. The second Raptor swung wide, cutting across the Black Hawk's flank. Its cannon barked, precise and merciless, shredding the second hostile before it could even bank away. Flaming wreckage spiraled into the desert, illuminating the valley below in bursts of orange light. Inside the Black Hawk, soldiers erupted in cheers, voices hoarse and raw. For the first time, victory seemed possible. Those stayed silent, her hands still locked on the trembling controls. Relief flickered inside her chest, but she couldn't waste focus. Not yet. Over the comms, a calm voice crackled, cool as steel. "Black Hawk, this is Falcon 1. You've got friends in the sky. Hold course." Exhaled hard. She wanted to thank him, but her voice stuck in her throat. Then, after a pause, the voice returned, this time quieter, almost reverent. "We heard what you did down there, flying through fire, bringing them out alive." A silence followed, broken only by static and the fatting echo of explosions. Then he spoke a single word. "Phoenix." The name hung in the air like prophecy. In the cockpit, Price blinked. Did they just? Didn't answer. Her eyes stayed forward, fixed on the horizon, but something deep inside her shifted. Phoenix. The bird that rises from fire, reborn through flames. That was what she had done, time and time again that night, dragging hope out of smoke and blood. The Raptors stayed close, circling like guardian angels, cutting down any threat that dared approach. With their protection, the battered Black Hawk limped onward, carrying its precious cargo of survivors. Behind her, soldiers whispered the word to each other, voices cracked with awe. "Phoenix." Some smiled through bloodied lips. Others just nodded, as though the name explained everything they had witnessed. Carter said nothing. But in her chest, beneath pain and exhaustion, burned a quiet fire that would never go out. She hadn't just survived the gauntlet, she had been forged in it. And now she carried a new name into legend. Phoenix. The desert wind howled against the battered frame of the Black Hawk as guided it through the final stretch. Every warning light on the console glowed red, a chorus of alarms wailing in her ears. The helicopter was on the edge of collapse, kept aloft by sheer willpower and stubborn engineering. Inside the cabin, the rescued soldiers sat in silence, too exhausted even to speak. Some clutched their wounds, others leaned against each other, eyes glassy with shock. They had seen death, and somehow, impossibly, they were still alive. Price leaned forward, voice low, almost reverent. "Base is less than 10 clicks. If she holds together, we're home." Didn't answer. Her jaw was locked, her vision swimming. Blood loss had left her pale, her wounded arm nearly numb, but her grip on the controls never wavered. Every muscle in her body screamed to give up, yet she forced herself onward. The raptors still circled above, their sleek shapes cutting across the dawn-streaked sky. Occasionally, one broke off to strafe enemy positions, ensuring no pursuers could reach the limping Black Hawk. Through the radio, one pilot's voice came again, calm, steady. "Stay with us, Phoenix. You're almost there." The word struck deeper than any bullet had. Phoenix. The soldiers whispered it again in the back, repeating it like prayer. She wasn't just Captain Carter anymore. She had become something more, a symbol carved from fire and blood. As the first outlines of the forward operating base appeared through the smoke and haze, cheers erupted from the cabin. Men wept openly, gripping each other's shoulders. For many, this sight had seemed impossible only hours earlier. But fate wasn't done testing her. The Black Hawk coughed violently, engines sputtering. The controls bucked in her hands, the nose dipping hard. "Come on, girl," whispered through clenched teeth, fighting to level her. The skids clipped the earth once, bounced, then scraped again. Sparks showered beneath them as metal screamed in protest. "Brace," Price shouted. The helicopter slammed down on the tarmac, skidding sideways in a spray of dust and fire. The rotors shrieked, snapping chunks of metal into the air before finally grinding to a halt. For a long, terrible moment, silence reigned. Then the cabin door burst open and soldiers spilled out, hobbling, crawling, dragging one another. Medics rushed in, shoving stretchers beneath the wounded. Officers shouted orders, crews swarmed the wreckage, but all of it blurred into noise for her. She slumped against the harness, vision fading, every ounce of strength drained from her body. Blood ran down her arm in dark streams. She tried to move, but her body refused. Price unclipped her harness, shouting her name, pulling her out into the daylight. The roar of relief from the men filled the air as they saw her carried clear. "She got us out," one cried. "All of us. Phoenix brought us back." The name spread like wildfire across the base, shouted from one soldier to the next. Phoenix, not Carter, not just a pilot. Phoenix, the one who flew into hell and came back with 200 souls. As medics lowered her onto a stretcher, eyes fluttered open. She heard the name echoing around her, louder and louder until it was all she could hear. Phoenix. She wanted to tell them it wasn't about her, that it was about the men who fought, the crew who bled beside her. But the words never came. Instead, she allowed herself the smallest of smiles before darkness claimed her. Days later, when she awoke in a field hospital, her arm bound and her body stitched, she learned the full truth. Not a single soldier had been left behind. 200 men had survived because she refused to stop. The story spread beyond the base, across commands, across the entire force. Newspapers would never print the classified details, but whispers carried faster than ink. And in every retelling, one truth remained. Captain Carter had entered the fire and risen again. To her crew, to the soldiers she saved, to the raptors who had watched her defy death itself, she was Phoenix. Not just a call sign, a legend. And legends never die.